This is an autobiographical sketch. As I approach my 80th year, I've had a desire to write an autobiography. There's only one problem with that, and that is I am not a writer. I'm a talker. So today I'm going to talk about a part of my life that's been influential from the beginning, and that's music. I was born 18 months after the end of the Second World War. My parents were believers in education, and not just in intellectual education, but in artistic education. And as a young boy, 5 or 6 years old, I started studying the piano. We lived in South Central Los Angeles. And again, as a young boy, maybe I was 6, I don't remember how old, I just remember how big the city was and how small I was. In the middle of South Central Los Angeles, I took a streetcar alone to my piano lesson with a woman named Dorothy Bishop, who was a famous local pedagogue at USC, and I started studying piano there. I don't really remember a lot. I remember studying Bartók, Microcosmos, and compound rhythms. I was beating 2 against 3 as a young age. And I hated it. I hated having to practice the piano. It was difficult for me. I fought until I was old enough to win. And finally, my parents said, okay, you don't want to play the piano, don't play the piano. I don't remember how old I was. I was probably around 10 or 11. When I was in my I'll back up. Our house was filled with music. On Sundays, each family member got to choose an album to play on the hi-fi. My father introduced me to jazz. My mother introduced me to classical music. I don't know who introduced us to Broadway tunes, but we always had My Fair Lady or South Pacific or Billie Holiday or Johnny Teagarden or Bessie Smith or a Beethoven symphony or a Mozart piano concerto. Our Sundays were filled with a variety of good music, both popular jazz and classical music, but it was good music. Probably the time I was 17, and I started to take a serious interest in jazz as a listener. Went to jazz clubs, and all of the jazz artists of the times. Got snuck into clubs, bars in the inner city of Los Angeles to listen to blues singers and jazz singers when I was 17 years old. And so I had a very good musical education. and decided I want to return to the piano and start studying jazz piano. I found a fellow, I'm trying to think of his name, I can't remember his name, and he said he was a jazz piano player. No, he was not. He played Sioux City Sue. He was, I don't know, he was a piano bar, played at a bar, and he had a very strange name. He was a very strange guy. And he came to my house, and so I started studying a little bit. Then I turned 18 and got drafted into the Army. When I got out of the Army, having spent a year in Vietnam, and 1 year after Vietnam, still in the Army, I returned to civilian life completely unprepared to make a way for myself. One of the things that was attractive about the Army was that I didn't have to make any decisions. All decisions were made for me. What I ate, where I ate, when I ate, if I ate, what I wore, when I showered, every decision was made for me. When I slept, when I woke up, nothing was left. Very little was left to my own discretion. I went in at 20 years old, came out 22 years old. I was married and had no ability to deal with the world. And in addition to that, I was carrying around a whole bag full of garbage that I had inherited from the time I was in the war. All this leads to the fact that I was unable to hold a job. I was, as I once wrote, I was a festering boil. Just touch the skin and I would explode in rage. And I did. I actually got into a fight with my boss where I threw a Coke bottle at him. And this caused me lots of problems. None of them were more than with my father, who was the vice president of a company that I was working at which I was working. And so I was fired, and I was a wreck, and I couldn't do anything, and I didn't know what to do, and I was on the edge. And my sister said to me, I have a twin sister. While I was studying music, she was studying dance. We went to an exercise class taught by Bela Lewitsky, who became my sister's mentor as a choreographer. My sister went on, my twin sister, she went on to have a very successful career as a choreographer. But she and I took from Bela Lewitsky, as children, class in rhythm and movement. And I had forgotten about that. She reminded me. So music has been integrated into my life from a very early age, both as an appreciator and a participant. And when I could not hold a job, Susan suggested to me, why don't you go back and study music? When she first suggested I go back to school because the GI Bill would support me, I thought that's ridiculous. I was a terrible student and I didn't like school. But she reminded me that I did like music. And I said, all right. And I began. And I took a beginning piano class. And that started the rest of my life. In these piano classes, I was introduced or reintroduced to the music of Bach. And I had a class with a woman named Eleanor Hammer, and we were studying the two-part inventions. And the hate that I had for practicing disappeared, and I became a fanatic practicer. I loved practicing piano. I loved practicing technique. I loved learning the new music, and I loved engrossing myself in the performance or the playing of this music. The demands of the fingers, action, and the eyes looking, and the ears listening, and melting into my mind and coming out with something that I could actually hear was the beginning of the reorganization of my brain, my body, my mind, my spirit. L'chaim. So I became a fanatic piano student and started practicing and practicing and practicing. And I remember it was the A minor two-part invention was the first one that I ever studied. And when I was playing it and I performed it, I was so nervous. When I performed it for my class, as we all had to do, it went very well. I was very nervous, but it went very well. I was well prepared. Afterwards, Mrs. Hammer asked me if I was familiar with the music of Glenn Gould, which I was not. And she said, well, you ought to listen to him because something in your playing made me think of him. I said, okay. I started listening to the music of Glenn Gould. And I was hooked for life. I was hooked. I was hooked on Glenn Gould. Still am. Listen to regularly. In fact, every morning. Lately, I first did the two-part inventions one at a time every morning on my Facebook feed. And then I went to the three-part inventions. Before that, I had done a Scarlatti sonata every day. I listened to music every day, intentionally, not incidentally. And so I practiced and I practiced and I practiced. And I was at the junior college and I was learning. And I decided I really wanted to go further. And so I decided to move up to the university, California State University at Northridge. I had to prepare an audition. Both my mother and my sister had been also music students at California State University, Northridge, and there was a wonderful teacher there by the name of Peter Hewitt, a great pianist and a wonderful teacher. By the time I was getting ready to go there, he was no longer there, but had moved down to Pomona College. And I contacted him and asked him if he would teach me. And he said, yes. And he did. And oh my gosh, it was an experience like no other. There was a dream. I had a dream about playing the piano and looking at the keyboard cover that was up and seeing inside the cover, watching my hands. And when I sat down for the first time, his lesson, that memory came back to me because in the keyboard flap that I saw on this beautiful Busendorfer piano, my hands. I didn't know anything about music. I didn't know anything about playing the piano. And he was demanding, and he was encouraging, and he was genuine. And I played the Bach C minor partita. I played a Beethoven Sonata, Opus 10, number 1, and I played the 6 little piano pieces of Schoenberg. And those 3 pieces were going to be my audition pieces for Cal State Northridge. I worked really, really hard, and I went and did a great job as my audition. How, I don't really know. Yeah, I think I do know. There's a line in Tai Chi is if the body fails, the Chi will take over, the Chi takes over, spirit will take over. Well, I think my body, my mind, everything gave over, and my spirit came alive, because my spirit was being rebuilt through the study of music, the integration of the different parts of my being to a single purpose, one that I could hear immediately the results of the work that I would do. There's no delay between the feedback and the production, so you can make instantaneous changes. And those drives, not those drives, those demands on myself help to reorganize myself, and I could start to concentrate. And I had my mind blown in the Army. I had my mind completely blown. Not just my mind, my being was blown in the service. I was blown up. And this reorganization, which I wasn't really aware of, that's what was happening until I started to be able to look back upon my rehabilitation and what an important part music played in that. And actually, music led me into the physical arts, the plastic arts, sculpture, mainly sculpture. And so at any rate, I went because I wanted to be a level 2 piano student, which was a performing level piano student, which got state paid 1-hour lessons a week. And the other program was in being a music teacher, which I wanted no part of. And then you got a half-hour lesson every week with the teacher. So I went with a goal of becoming a performance major, and I achieved that goal. And I worked really, really hard, and I produced a really good performance. And then the hard work of being a music major or a piano major where you're expected to produce. Well, I couldn't keep up. There were too many years of missing study to be able to keep up with the rest of the students that were able to just keep on climbing. I had a few big major deficits which held me back. And my teacher said to me one day, his name was Charles Fierro, and he was a very good teacher, and he was a very good performer, he was a very good guy, and he told me the truth. He said, you could probably get a career as a music teacher, a piano teacher, but there's too much missing. We can't keep on giving you our lessons at state expense. So I'm recommending that you be placed into a music teacher program. I say thank you very much, and changed majors into music composition. And when I got into music composition, I met a really interesting man named Aurelio de la Vega. Aurelio de la Vega had been a Cuban delegate to the some cultural governmental organization, I don't remember, and a composer of a very small note. You can find him on Google. If you look up the music of Aurelio de la Vega, you'll see he was a character, and he greatly influenced me, not in his music composition, which I didn't particularly like, but in his attitude towards life. And he would come, I was a bartender. I worked my way through college at that point as a bartender, and he used to come and sit at my bar, and he would tell me stories. and he was a great storyteller. And I just learned a lot. I learned a lot from him. And then I decided to move on and go to California Institute of the Arts because I had developed an interest in modern music, non-linear music, music that's composed non-narratively. All of European music up to the end of the 20th century, excuse me, up to the end of the 19th century, was a narrative. And as that tonal system fell apart and a new way to define music was produced, the music became very dissonant, very ugly, and for the most part, very ugly. And very interesting to the composers who composed for each other. The performers hated it, the audience hated it, and for the most part, it was very ugly. But it was interesting, intellectually, and it lost its emotional component. It drove me away. I got a scholarship for my last year at Cal Arts because I did a really good job with this little intellectual. I had a great teacher. This little intellectual exercise of putting a frame around time and then organizing the time within that frame into a way that identifies itself to the listener if they're paying attention. And it doesn't, it sounds chaos. It's the idea. Humans can't create chaos. They have to create patterns to imitate chaos. And that's what I did with this time block, and I did it very, very well. Who cares? Because you get a bachelor's degree in music, you can't do anything. And so I decided I needed a way to make a living. So I went into piano tuning, and I learned piano tuning. And piano tuning took me from the school world to being able to take care of myself. And because in school I had government loans, or not government loans, GI Bill, government loan, something like that, and a few scholarships. And then I had to make a living, and that's how I did it with piano tuning. And so it's continued. I quit playing the piano, I quit studying piano, I lost piano, I picked up the tuba and played jazz. I played a bass in Robert Young's Eldorado Syncopators. Robert Young is the best musician I've ever known. And in this band, he plays cornet in the style of nobody, but closest to Bix Beiderbecke. And it was my great good pleasure to pick up the bass line of that band for over 20 years. And so my piano trained gene, in between the piano and the tuba was an accordion and Mexican music and other things as well. And part two will have to wait because I can't talk anymore.